I've been turning wrenches on pickup trucks since 1981. In that time, I've seen a lot of trucks come and go. Most of them quit early because somebody neglected something simple. But every now and then you find one that should have been in a junkyard 20 years ago, and it's still running down the road like nothing's wrong with it. I'm talking about trucks with 600,000 miles, 700,000 miles. I've met the owners. I've worked on some of those trucks myself. And I'm going to tell you something that might sound strange coming from a man who spent his whole life around engines. Every single one of those trucks, without exception, was maintained the same way. Not by coincidence. Not because they all had the same luck. They all arrived at that mileage by doing three specific things that nobody taught them in school and that the dealer sure isn't going to tell you about. They figured it out the hard way, the same way I did, the same way your grandfather probably did without ever calling it anything special. It was just called taking care of your truck. Before I get into those three things, I want you to understand something. These aren't secrets because they're complicated. They're secrets because nobody profits from you knowing them. The people who make money off trucks want you trading yours in before it hits 200,000 miles. They want you on a schedule that serves their bottom line, not yours. The owners of those high-mileage trucks I mentioned, they didn't read about this in a service manual. They learned it from watching what actually broke and what actually held up. That's the education I'm about to give you right now. If you're new here, my name is Wade Tucker. I spent 22 years as a diesel mechanic for a logging company out of eastern Tennessee. I've owned or personally worked on more pickup trucks than I can count. I've pulled engines, rebuilt transmissions, and torn down enough cylinder heads to know what makes them last and what makes them quit. This channel exists because the information I'm about to share with you is being systematically withheld from truck owners by people who make more money the less you know. If that sounds like something you need to hear, go ahead and subscribe. I've got more where this came from, and I put all of it out there for free because you deserve to know how to take care of your own equipment. And I want to hear from you too. At the end of this video, I'm going to ask you a specific question about the highest mileage truck you've ever personally seen. Leave that in the comments. I read every single one, and some of the stories you folks send in are better than anything I could make up. But for now, let's talk about what actually works. The first thing those high-mileage truck owners understand is oil, and not just in the way you think. They change their oil at 5,000 miles or sooner, and here's the part that nobody in the synthetic oil industry wants you to hear. They don't run synthetic only. They run conventional oil, the old-fashioned kind, at the right interval. And they beat trucks with that approach that owners spending 3 times as much on synthetic oil don't come close to matching. Now let me explain why, because there's actual chemistry here that matters. Oil breaks down under heat and time. That's just what it does. The additive package in conventional oil is designed to handle a specific window of operation, usually somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 miles, depending on the brand and the driving conditions. After that window, the detergents get used up, the viscosity modifiers start to shear apart, and you're essentially running hot, thin, dirty lubricant through your main bearings and your cam lobes. The answer isn't a more expensive oil. The answer is changing the oil before it stops doing its job. I know a man down in Clinton, Tennessee runs a shop that mainly works on diesel equipment, but he takes in pickups on the side. He did oil analysis on a fleet of work trucks for a logging outfit a few years back. Half of them were running conventional oil changed every 5,000 miles. The other half were running synthetic changed every 8,000 to 10,000 miles per the manufacturer's recommendation. He sent samples to a lab at 15,000-mile intervals and had the results analyzed. The trucks running conventional oil at 5,000-mile intervals had lower iron content in their oil analysis, better oil film strength, and less oxidation byproducts than the synthetic trucks running longer intervals. The synthetic was a better product, technically, but the conventional changed twice as often did a better job of protecting the engine because fresh oil, any oil, is better than aged oil, even expensive aged synthetic. I've torn down engines that came out of trucks with 300,000 miles. I know what worn cylinder walls look like on a truck that was neglected, and I've also seen the inside of engines pulled from trucks with 350,000 miles that still had crosshatch pattern on the cylinder bores, still had flat cam lobes, still had main bearings with normal clearance. The difference was never the brand of oil. It was the discipline of changing it before it gave up. The second thing those high-mileage trucks have in common is cooling system maintenance at 50,000 miles. And I don't mean flushing the coolant and topping it off. I mean a full inspection. Water pump, thermostat, hose condition, pressure test. The whole system. Here's what most people don't understand. The number one killer of engines after 150,000 miles is not internal wear. It's cooling failure. Not because the engine overheated dramatically and seized up on the highway. I'm talking about slow, progressive cooling system degradation that nobody catches until it's too late. Think about what happens in a cooling system that isn't maintained. Hoses age from the inside out. Coolant gets acidic over time even if you top it off. That acid eats at the water pump housing and the block where coolant sits. The thermostat gets sticky. It starts to open late, running the engine hotter than it's designed for. And because it's a slow process, you don't notice until you're losing coolant into the oil or cracking a head gasket. I've seen that exact sequence on dozens of engines. The owner thought the truck was running fine right up until the moment it wasn't. At 50,000 miles, I pull the thermostat and test it on the stove. I pressure test the cooling system with a hand pump and a gauge. I look at the hoses from the inside if I can cut one open, and if they're showing age on the outside, I replace them without waiting. I inspect the water pump weep hole, that little hole at the bottom of the housing where coolant will start to drip out if the seal is going. If I see any sign of moisture there, that water pump is coming off now, not at the side of the road 200 miles from home. I check the radiator for internal buildup with a flashlight and a borescope if I have one handy, and if the cooling fins are clogged with years of neglected coolant and debris, I flush it properly or I replace it. A lot of people think the water pump is something that just fails catastrophically. Sometimes it does, but more often you get warning signs months in advance if you're paying attention. Coolant consumption with no visible leak. A slight sweet smell under the hood after long drives. The heater taking longer to get warm than it used to. These are all things I watch for, and any one of them is enough to pull that water pump and inspect it right now. Waiting on this stuff is how you turn a $200 repair into a $3,000 engine replacement. The third maintenance secret that the owners of those 700,000-mile trucks share is transmission fluid change at 30,000 miles, regardless of what the manual says. Now, I know what your manual tells you. It probably says lifetime fluid. It might even say never change the transmission fluid. I want you to understand where that recommendation comes from. It does not come from an engineer who wants your transmission to last. It comes from a marketing department that calculated that the fluid lasting longer means fewer warranty claims in the warranty window and lower costs for the manufacturer. That is all. Lifetime fluid is a lie. There is no such thing. Transmission fluid degrades. It darkens, it picks up clutch material from normal shifting, it accumulates varnish that deposits on valve body passages and solenoid screens. At 30,000 miles on most automatics, that fluid has done its job, and it's time for fresh fluid and a filter. At 60,000 miles, if you haven't changed it, you're not just running degraded fluid. You're running fluid with worn-out additives that are no longer protecting your clutches or lubricating your gear train properly. I watched a transmission go out on a 2004 F-150 at 112,000 miles. The owner had never changed the transmission fluid, not once. The truck came into the shop with a complaint of harsh shifts and a check engine light for a transmission fault code. I pulled the pan and found fluid that looked like black mud. The filter was completely clogged with clutch material. The valve body had varnish buildup so thick I could scrape it with a fingernail. That transmission should have lasted at least another 100,000 miles with proper service. Instead, it needed a full rebuild that cost the owner $3,200. Here's what that varnish does. It deposits on the small passages inside the valve body that control shift timing and clutch apply pressure. As those passages clog, the transmission can't apply the clutches smoothly. You get harsh shifts, delayed engagement, and eventually the clutch packs themselves start to slip because the apply pressure is wrong. Once you have slip, you generate heat, and heat accelerates the breakdown of the remaining fluid. It's a downward spiral that a $30 fluid and filter change would have prevented entirely. I change automatic transmission fluid on my own trucks every 30,000 miles, no exceptions. I use conventional fluid unless the manufacturer specifically calls for something else. I install a new filter every time, and I check the pan for any signs of metal or clutch material while I'm in there. If I see metal, that's a different conversation. But plain dark fluid and a dirty filter tell me it's time for fresh fluid and nothing more. That's all most transmissions need if you do it on schedule. Now I want to talk about specific trucks because I know some of you are wondering which trucks actually do make it to 700,000 miles and what they have in common besides the three things I just described. I've personally seen or worked on 3 trucks that cross that threshold. A 1999 Toyota Tacoma with the 3.4-liter V6, a 2002 Toyota Tundra with the 4.7-liter V8, and a 1997 Ford F-150 with the 4.6 22-valve modular V8. The Tacoma was owned by a carpenter in Georgia. He bought it new and drove it until it hit 712,000 miles before the frame rusted out around the rear shock mounts. The engine and transmission were still strong. He'd maintained it religiously, did his own oil changes, changed the transmission fluid every 30,000, and kept up with the cooling system. The frame gave out, not the drivetrain. That truck should have gone to 800,000 if they'd addressed the rust earlier. The Tundra belonged to a cattle farmer in Kentucky. He used it to pull trailers 6 days a week for years. That truck had the original engine and transmission at 703,000 miles when I looked at it for a pre-purchase inspection on behalf of a buyer who was considering buying it. The engine had normal compression across all cylinders, no oil consumption, no coolant loss. The transmission shifted clean. He'd changed the fluid every 30,000, used conventional oil, and flushed his cooling system at 50,000-mile intervals. That truck was worth every penny of the $11,000 the seller was asking, and I told the buyer that in writing. The 1997 F-150 belonged to my neighbor across the road. He drove it to work every day for 15 years, and I helped him maintain it the whole time. It had the 4.6-liter 2-valve V8, which in my experience is one of the most durable engines Ford ever put in a pickup. That engine does not have the 3-valve head issues of the later 5.4-liter. It's a simple pushrod 2-valve design with solid rocker arms and no timing chain tensioners to fail. He hit 708,000 miles before a head gasket let go on the passenger side, and honestly that was my fault for not catching the early signs of cooling system neglect on my last inspection. What did all 3 of those trucks have in common besides the 3 maintenance habits I described? They were all from an era when manufacturers still designed trucks to be worked on. They all had accessible oil filters, external transmission filters, easy-to-reach drain plugs, and cooling systems with no computer-managed thermostats or proprietary coolant sensors. They were built to be maintained by an owner with basic tools and a service manual. That is not a small thing. That is the entire reason those trucks are still on the road. Which brings me to what modern trucks lack and why I get concerned when people ask me about buying a newer model as a long-term investment. Modern pickup trucks are full of things that make them harder to maintain and easier to control. Sealed transmissions that require dealer-level fluid change equipment. Engine oil filters hidden under intake manifolds or buried in the engine bay where you need special tools to reach them. Cooling systems with thermostats that are computer-controlled and cannot be tested or replaced without a scan tool. Transmission filters that are internal and require dropping the pan, and even then may not be user-serviceable. The 2011 and later Ford SVT Raptor had a transmission that required pulling the drive shaft and the transmission tail housing to access the filter. The filter itself was a specialty item. On a 1997 F-150, I can change the transmission filter in 20 minutes in my driveway with a socket set and a pan to catch the fluid. On a newer truck, you might need to take it to a shop with specific equipment just to do a simple fluid change, and the dealer knows that. That's the point. The other thing modern trucks lack is simplicity. The more electronics a truck has, the more things can fail in ways that require dealer diagnostic software to even identify. I've had trucks come into shops where the mechanic knew something was wrong but couldn't pinpoint it without spending hours with a scan tool, and even then had to order parts based on educated guesses. A truck that requires a computer to tell you what's broken is a truck that will cost you money whether you can fix it yourself or not. I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying don't buy a modern truck. I'm saying understand what you're buying. Understand that the maintenance intervals printed in your owner's manual were written by people who have an interest in you trading your truck in before it gets expensive to own. Understand that the fluids in your transmission and your cooling system need service whether the manual tells you so or not. Understand that the truck was designed to serve the manufacturer as long as it is under warranty, and after the warranty expires, you're on your own. If you drive a modern truck and you want it to last, apply the same 3 principles I laid out today. Change your oil on a schedule that makes sense for how you actually drive, not what the manual suggests. Inspect and service your cooling system at 50,000 miles before you start losing coolant or overheating. And change your transmission fluid every 30,000 miles regardless of what anybody tells you, because the day that transmission fails, you're going to wish you'd spent $60 on fluid and a filter instead of $1,500 on a rebuild. Those high-mileage owners I mentioned at the start, they didn't have secret knowledge. They didn't have expensive tools or dealer connections. They had discipline, and they had a basic understanding of what their equipment actually needed. You can have that too. It doesn't cost much. It costs attention and consistency, and the willingness to do the work when the truck doesn't seem to be asking for it. That's what this channel is for, making sure you have the knowledge to take care of your own truck and the confidence to push back when somebody tells you that you need something you don't. Leave a comment below and tell me what the highest mileage truck you've personally seen or owned is. What make, what model, what year, and what did it have going for it that made it last? I read every single one, and some of those stories are exactly the kind of proof that this stuff works. If you found this useful, go ahead and subscribe. I've got plenty more videos on taking care of pickup trucks, keeping them running long after the dealer told you it was time to trade in. These trucks were built to last. You just have to know how to let them.